Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Lambert from the Geek and Review, and I am here with our friend Nikki Shaver from Legal Technology Hub. And Nikki, you have a new event series coming out called the Demo Dozen. Tell us more about that.
That's right. Hi, Greg. Hi, everyone. So, actually, we held our first one of these on February 19th, hosted by Stephanie Wilkins. You're right. It's called our Demo Dozen event. At these new LTH events, which are free to attend, by the way, you can log in virtually to see 12 curated providers offer demos of their products. It's an easy way to get up to date on what's new in the market, whether that is brand new products or existing ones with new features. We'll be offering these throughout the year, and our next one is coming up on May 19th. So, if you're a vendor listening and would like to participate in upcoming Demo Dozen events, let us know at legaltechnologyhub.com or reach out to me or Chris Ford on LinkedIn. If you're a buyer or other participant in the market and you'd like to learn more or attend one of these events, make sure you follow our page on LinkedIn. It's at Legal Tech Hub. Or if you follow along at legaltechnologyhub.com, we have an events drop down on our page. And if you follow on that, you will see registration links for all of our upcoming events, including Demo Dozen. So keep an eye out for that. It's a great way to know what's what in the market.
Yeah, and having these very compacted demonstrations really helps people like me to evaluate things very quickly. So thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Greg.
Welcome to the Geek and Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal industry. I'm Marlene Gaybauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert. And Marlene, for years we've talked about the integration tax, which is that massive headache that law firms face trying to get all of our different verticals of software systems to actually talk to each other. It's been a pain for years for us.
Yeah, I've been the victim of that tax.
We've all been the victim of it.
Yes. And, with the explosion of AI, that problem just got worse. But maybe, in the news, we may have finally reached that USB-C moment for a legal tech stack. And we're going to talk about it today. So we're joined by two leaders from Anthropic who are at the center of this new open standard called Model Context Protocol, or MCP.
And our good friend and multiple podcast guest, Pablo Arredondo, who recently stepped away from his role there at Thomson Reuters, connected us with a couple of folks from Anthropic to discuss this topic. I'm really excited.
Thank you,
We have
Pablo.
with us Matt Samuels, who's the senior product counsel at Anthropic. Matt focuses in on the intersection of agentic innovation and enterprise legal needs, helping bridge the gap between complex technical infrastructure and high security, safety, and confidentiality requirements of the legal profession. Sounds like my job, Matt.
We try.
And we're also joined by Delimarsky, a member of the technical staff at Anthropic and one of the core maintainers of the MCP project. So he knows all the secret sauce. So Den is the architect helping define how AI models can perform real-world actions through standardized composable tools. Matt and Den, welcome to the Geek and Review. So happy to
Welcome,
have you.
guys.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having us.
All right, so Den, we've heard, like Marlene had described in the intro, that MCP is described as the USB-C for AI. As someone who is still using an iPhone 14 with the Lightning plug-in,
Guilty.
what does that actually mean for a law firm, that has data scattered across, iManage and Slack and LexisNexis and all these other verticals? What does that mean for us?
Yeah, for sure. By the way, don't be ashamed of the iPhone. I just recently upgraded from an iPhone 10 to
Ooh,
17. So it took me a while. Like there was a
well
forcing
done.
function for me to upgrade. So, but now it's all USB-C. But anyway, look, one of the big challenges that folks have when they use AI is how do you make it useful with real data that usually lives inside a wide variety of silos, right? And I mean that comes from the background that a lot of the models that are trained, like any model on the market, are trained on a specific corpus of data, right? And that data is usually the data that is publicly available. It's on the internet, and it's not something that is specific to your organization. It's not something specific for your practice. And again, that makes a ton of sense because a lot of this data is confidential, it is private, it is only for very specific workloads. But people still want to leverage the power of AI to make sense of it, right? If you have specific number sheets, you have any specific, documents that help you outline future cases, how do you get models to universally access data? And like you said, the big challenge here too is that there is a variety of these sources that are structured in all sorts of ways. Slack works in its own way. LexisNexis structures data in its own way. And so if you would typically point people and say, oh, well, you have to write these bespoke solutions like different applications or APIs, like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of heavy lifting. So this is where MCP, or Model Context Protocol, comes in, and it essentially creates these universal set of rails of saying, if you want to use data with AI models, here's how to do this. It's a very, very opinionated protocol. It means like if you want to do things like return results, here's how you do this. If you want to do things like securely access the data and do authentication authorization, here's how you do this. And so that opinionated piece might seem a little bit weird for some people because they're like, well, but my data has all sorts of different conventions that are different. But the forcing function of saying that you have to follow this universal, like USB-C-like adapter protocol is that you can connect this now to any client and it works just as well. So I can plug in, an MCP server into Claude, and it works just as well if I plug it into another MCP client that also supports the protocol because the protocol itself is open source. So it's a massive, massive, basically gateway for enabling data access to any model in a way that doesn't force people to just constantly rewrite custom bespoke solutions just to be able to access a specific data source.
Yeah, and the models themselves are they're created like for iManage, which has all of our documents in them. It would be iManage that creates the server that allows you to access that. Am I understanding that right? And so technically the security could be set up on their end to know who I am and respect what I can and can't get into.
Right, absolutely. And I think that there's a good degree of obviously like number of official MCP servers that anybody can create, right? So in your case, you might have iManage creating an MCP server, Slack has its own MCP server, so you would be able to also compose them. That's an also underrated superpower of MCP is composability, is that you're not just seeing just one data source, but you can go into, for example, Claude. And if you connect several MCP servers of saying, let's say Slack and iManage, and you can ask the LLMs like, you know what, I'm reviewing a case for X, Y, and Z scenario. Can you get me all the conversations that happened and then correlate them with data in iManage? And so the LLM then would query the data from both sources. And you, as somebody that cares about the case and not the underlying pipeline, you don't care that the data behind is JSON or XML or whatever else. You essentially have that universal pipe that will get that data to your LLM, to Claude, and then it can process the data in a way that Claude expects it. And it makes sense for Claude, right? So you're reducing the burden on yourself. But ultimately, yes, there's official MCP servers, but we also see people just build MCP servers for their own scenarios, right? Like that just, they have a bunch of tooling in-house that they've built previously, over years and years of establishing their practice. And they come in and say, you know what? I want to make sense of this data with Claude. How do I do this? Well, because the SDK is open source, because it's an open protocol, right? Like anybody can write an MCP server. They will just use, Claude code to go and write their custom MCP server, and there you go. Like, so you can use an official one, but you can also build your own.
So Greg gave an example of iManage. I mean, could you also do something similar, like if you have a data lake at your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. There's the MCP protocol itself doesn't really restrict you what you can do. Like, think of it as basically the universal abstraction, right? On one end, you have USB-C. On the other end of that cable can be anything, right? It can be USB, it can be like a DisplayPort, a Thunderbolt, like anything. So if you're following the same analogy of like the adapters. So you have just one opinionated end, but behind it, you can have any data store, any application, any API. Look, you can talk to some remote server, you can talk to an in-house server, you can talk to an application that runs on your machine. Like, you're not actually forced into a specific mode of operation here. It's just expectation is that the way you connect it to other MCP clients is universal.
So, Matt, you and your colleagues spent a lot of time talking to law firm chief information security officers. What's the translation that you find yourself doing most often when explaining what MCP servers are and why they're valuable?
Yeah, we use CISO is like the short way to put it, but I don't know if that's universally well known. So yeah, chief information security officers. I also, just in my role in legal, I'm often talking to lawyers or folks who are working to get a deal done at the enterprise level. I think Den did a much better job describing like a version of the conversation I'm having. I think at the 10,000 foot level, what we're trying to do is give Claude access to your enterprise data so you can make it more useful. In a law firm setting, you mentioned a lot of the tools already. You have iManage, SharePoint, maybe it's Gmail or Outlook for email. And I think I like to give them a couple of handy examples of things you might not have imagined you can do with AI because you weren't familiar with these tooling options. So, you can have it draft an email. You should probably, but then if you're the CISO, you might not want them to send the email without the human reviewing it. So
I can tell you, they do not want you to send the email.
Exactly. And at least, just speaking of some of the servers that we've seen that are in the email space, they have they're called tools. So what you want to do as the enterprise is try to understand, what tools are available through the server. And they might have draft email and send email might be two different tools. So it really comes up to the admin to set rules, and you have kind of standard concepts like RBAC, least privilege issues, which user groups and roles can have access to what tools, and then training your employee base how to use these tools in a responsible way. Den mentioned MCP itself it's a pretty abstract protocol, but then on a client, not like a law firm client, but an AI client like Claude, we try to package these up into things called connectors or plugins or things we can talk about. And we try to make it easy for the enterprise to set pretty thoughtful rules around this in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how hard is it to do?
It's not super hard. So especially on the admin side, we have pages where you can click on each individual. First of all, you decide in the first instance, do I want to connect to the official Slack MCP, or do I want to connect to Greg Lambert's MCP server, which calls Slack? And I bet 99 out of 100 CISOs are going to say, no, use the official one. And then even within that, you can specify which tools can be used. And at least within Anthropic, you can set rules within the tool. So it could be always allow, never allow, sometimes allow. And there will probably be more variations on this over time. But we really make it, to use the word composability, we do a lot of work thinking through what the admin experience is like. And, we think of ourselves as an enterprise first company. So a lot of the time and thought goes into, well, what permissions would a CISO or the admin of a data science team want to have in place? And it's really like point and click type stuff.
Yeah. I can hear my the security ops people saying, but is it auditable? Can I see who's doing what? Is that something that you think about with these tools?
We definitely do. At the high level, if the admin set something to, I don't know the full details of our stack, but if the admin said, hey, these folks can't use this tool, they shouldn't be. And I would hope that there's a way to look into debugging of that sort of issue. But then we do have things like a compliance API, and then Claude itself as one of the clients, and I'm sure this is true for all of them, when they actually invoke these servers as part of you send a prompt like the one Den asked, like search through Slack to find me all relevant information, and then populate iManage. The model should tell you in the conversation itself when it called a tool and what it did with it. And then if afterwards, you can look at the chat and see what happened, and you can use things like the compliance API to do it at scale.
think in our prep call, and this kind of expands on the question I'd asked earlier. We talked about, does the AI respect my document permissions on the level? Dan, do you mind walking us through kind of like how an MCP uses like an OAuth 2.5 to, or 2.1 rather, to ensure that I'm not allowed in the folder in the DMS, or is the AI isn't, allowed in there either? Is it, how do I go about explaining that?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that we've done from the very beginning with the protocol is make sure that it respects a lot of kind of the security boundaries that are well established in the ecosystem already, right? So if you look at MCP through a purely pragmatic security lens, I put it this way, a lot of the concepts are actually very well familiar to basically anybody who's been building any application that deal with user authentication and authorization for the past like 2 decades. It snaps to OAuth, which is a universal standard. Again, just like MCP. It's not maybe like universal in a traditional sense, but the vast majority of services use OAuth in some capacity, right? And you can use OAuth to basically gate access to your MCP server the same way you would gate access to any website or API or any other resource. And what that enables is basically when you connect an MCP server that accesses private data, like be it your case manager system or maybe Slack, you're not just going to add it and just have access to every single conversation and document and piece of information that exists there. The server itself will identify that, oh, hold on, like before you called me, is like what Matt described kind of the tool calling scenario. Before you call a tool, the server can say, well, hold on a second. You did not actually provide me a credential by which I know that you can access this document. Can you please log in? And what happens then is that a flow kicks off that usually goes through your browser, or it can be in-app for some MCP clients, that's going to ask you for your credentials. And those credentials are, again, very standard to the service that you're accessing. So if you're going to be authenticating with Slack, you're probably going to get a Slack authentication prompt. And this is where you can, log in with your Google credentials. You can log in with your email and go through the standard flow of like two-factor auth and all the, whether you use a passkey or a security key, one of the YubiKeys. And a lot of this, again, lives outside kind of the boundaries of MCP itself. MCP itself does not dictate how you do 2FA. It doesn't talk about, how exactly, what's the format of the credential or the token, or you can't use a password. You have to be a password that's approved from the app. Like, it doesn't care as long as you're using OAuth, right? And I think like once you go through the OAuth flow, your client, in this case, for example, Claude, gets a token. A token is basically a string that represents the user, that basically says that Greg and Marlene are part of this group. They have access to X, Y, and Z resources. And then the client takes that token, and when it evokes a tool, for example, get Slack conversation, it sends that token as well and says, oh, and by the way, when you ask for this conversation, this is Marlene that's asking, and here's her token. And then you get conversations back that only Marlene can access, right? So like I'm authenticated with my client as Marlene. And these are the conversations I get. You as Greg are going to log in with your credentials, and you're going to have access to the resources that you want. Now, also, MCP servers themselves, as Matt called out, they can have many different tools. So I might have get Slack conversation, I might have send DM, I might have, read channel, and some of them are accessible to everybody. So if you can log in, you're basically a valid user, you can use this tool. In some cases, some tools can require what's known as additional scopes and say, no, before you can access this tool, you need to have this additional permission. So for example, if like we're talking about some legal cases where Greg, like you said, like this is only for me, nobody else in my team can access, and Marlene logs in with her credentials, even though she did log in, she authenticated, she went through kind of the authorization flow, that doesn't necessarily mean that automatically she gets access to the same tool and the same data from that tool that you had. And again, a lot of these conventions are very, very traditional OAuth. So nothing here is MCP specific. This is just the implementation of the open protocol that exists for a while. But MCP leans on that as basically the foundational piece for a lot of these security basically requirements for MCP servers.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, it syncs up nicely with sort of like need to know requirements in law firms and I was also thinking about ethical walls and how do you kind of protect from the wrong people getting access to the wrong materials. So you've talked about MCP registries. In a law firm environment, how does a centralized IT group use a registry to prevent the lawyer from setting up their own server and potentially leaking privileged data or introducing security risks?
We would never have lawyers do that.
No, we wouldn't.
Never.
Or disgruntled employees or anything like that. That never happens. What are you talking about? Not
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it comes back to what we were chatting about in my previous the previous question to me, which is making the AI clients, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, you name it. They spend a lot of time thinking about what the admin experience is and kind of what the default settings are. So if you're a thoughtful enterprise, and I think this is the norm at probably most places, the admin should say, "Hey, I need to approve any MCP, net new MCP server that the organization wants to use," and they have effectively a dashboard where they can toggle on and off whether the server could be used at all. I think over time that'll probably be even better. Uh, there'll be even more granular permissions. So you might think of groups or individuals within groups and what tools they use. So the way I think of it, we were chatting about like least privilege was kind of the concept you were talking about, Marlene. I think a lot of this comes down to basic enterprise security and IT practices. They apply pretty neatly, at least on a client like Claude, and I assume most of the other major clients. They're thoughtful about what is kind of the baseline that you can do, you want your organization to do at the admin level. And then each individual person, I'm not a Slack user, but it's approved within Anthropic. So I'm not going to enable that tool. Or, there may be more risk forward enterprises that say, actually, I'm okay with a certain group of users playing around with what we call like custom MCP servers in Claude. So I think at the end of the day, it all comes back to a level of risk tolerance and then communicating to your employee base, hey, we've now added the iManage server. It's default enabled for maybe the entire law firm or only a couple of folks in the law firm when it's in a testing period. Um, so I think that's the way that we think about it here.
Okay, so I have another one for you. We've seen reports of Rio Tinto's legal team connecting an LLM to 4.5 million iManage documents via MCP in just a few days. So, Matt, what does that tell you about the speed of adoption we're about to see in big law? I'm very interested in hearing this answer because
Yeah.
we're so slow usually.
Yeah. I can't speak for the law firms. We have a number of law firm clients, I'm sure, or customers. I'm sure the same is true for many other AI clients. I think the speed here is faster than I would have seen or I would have expected before joining Anthropic. And part of the reason is like just the utility is so obvious. And I think it's become more obvious in the past couple weeks and months with tools, not just from Anthropic, but other companies. We might chat about this one a little bit later, but Claude Code is a product we have that's been pretty MCP and plugin forward, and you can do a lot of things there. But it's, historically, it's a little scary if you're not a technical user to do your work in the terminal. We released a product that's more for other types of knowledge workers, like lawyers, called Cowork, and I'm a heavy user of it myself. And the amount that I'm better at my job and able to triage issues and give my internal clients good legal service using that tool is amazing. And it's largely because of MCP, because it does, I think the example Den shared earlier, we have a lot of Slack and Gmail and other conversations, just being able to pull in and ask in natural language, what's going on here? Or if, for those of us who are millennials, ELI 5, explain like I'm 5, what's happening with this complicated technology. And it can do that. And the models are smart enough to know, oh, I know where to look within Slack to find that information and then digest it for you. There's a lot of other crazy examples of things I and others on our legal team and other teams have done. But I think once you've played around with these tools, you see the like immense value that you get. And, I think law firms, they have a pretty like standard set of tools that they, places where their enterprise data lives. A lot of those have MCP servers. So I think it's all about getting yourself set up and playing around with it. And you'll see pretty amazing gains that you can have to like the knowledge work you do.
Yeah. That's my number one advice. Get in there and play around with it. See what it can
100%.
do. It has worked pretty well. So, Dan, I wanted to talk about. We mentioned it briefly with things like co-work and code, but there's a real big push now toward agentic workflows, and again, I think we'll probably talk the rest of the conversation about this. But you mentioned that the MCP isn't just about searching the data or reading the data. It can actually act on the data, and I break it down to we're at a point right now where it's not just that it's reading and giving you back an answer. It's actually reading and writing and then taking next steps. So do you mind just describing a workflow where an agentic agent doesn't just find, a contract within the DMS or within a product like Ironclad, but actually kind of helps redline it or draft it and doing some follow up, email and in the lawyer's voice? So what's some options that we have?
Yeah, so a lot of the capabilities that you just described are going beyond the protocol itself. Like the protocol is the conduit for a lot of the requirements and the ability to access documents and the ability to read them. And ultimately, the agent harness is the one that is responsible for doing things with MCPs or MCP servers. So you would have, for example, an agent that has access to a myriad of MCP servers, and those MCP servers can expose a number of primitives. Things like tools, as Matt called out, and tools are basically functions where you can say, my server can read a Slack conversation, it can send a DM, it can read a Gmail thread, right? It can have resources, which can be documents or database records or anything like that. It also has primitives such as tasks, which is basically asynchronous processing. Like I call them like atoms myself, but basically because they're just components to this. But essentially what it enables the agent is saying like, hey, I need you to go and do something, and I'll do something else while you do that. But like I'll kick off a task on some remote MCP server and I'll get back to you. Tell me when you're done, right? So when you start assembling these together, you start seeing the true power of a lot of these agents and MCP servers is because they're now able to pull documents, pull different resources, database records, combine them, and then realize, oh, for this one, we actually need to go and do some digging through like another database. It might be a little bit slower. So we're just going to kick off that task and it will get back to whenever it's done, but I'm just going to continue building kind of the set of requirements for, my next case or anything of that nature. So MCP really is becoming kind of the plumbing for a lot of these agentic harnesses where by themselves, they can trigger actions. They can basically think through some of the kind of the requirements that need to be done and kind of break it down into a set of tasks and then execute on those tasks. But to be able to successfully execute those, you need those primitives. And this is what MCP exposes. You have those primitives that now the agent can act on and act with. That did not exist before, right? Because if you look back at, like 4 years when the first kind of the models were coming out, you'd have this very basic of just like, oh, just ask the model something fun and see it answer, right? But it's like, oh, okay, like that's great. But now they can actually act. And the MCP, like if you think about it, like MCP it enables your agent to have actual like robotic arms to go and reach for the right data and reach for the right applications and reach for the right kind of content that it needs to then act and put together, whatever you're looking for, whatever task you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I've written a story about this, and we call it giving the AI hands to work with it. It can actually do it. It's a really exciting time. I know, it's been probably since November that this is really kind of taken on and caught fire. But just watching the things that code and co-work and with the ChatGPT with Codex and other things that are out there is just really a different. It's a different AI than we had a year ago. So it's pretty exciting.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
One analogy for because you have a lawyer and CISO and kind of legal adjacent audience. I think a helpful way to think about this and to kind of explore how this might be useful is to imagine, what tasks do you actually do as a law firm partner? And your associate, I remember taking the bar exam and being kind of surprised, like, wow, you are just expecting me to answer this legal question based on like my latent legal knowledge. That's what like a pre-MCP LLM can do, right? All it has access to is what it was trained on. Much better associate can do some legal research. They can send an email. They can upload something to a database. So think of the tasks you normally do as a lawyer and how you delegate things to associates or junior partners. And I think if you kind of start thinking of the models this way, and Dan mentioned a harness, that's kind of the rules of the road for what your kind of law firm's rules. I think that's an interesting way to think about it, and you can get creative once you kind of break things down into component tasks and like the actions that you or the associate would take.
All right. So Anthropic recently launched the MCP apps. Just want to pull on this a little bit. Then that's moving from the text-based chat to sort of these interactive interfaces, sort of what you were talking about. Now, I would say we kind of run the gamut in terms of people's abilities and experiences in the legal community. I mean, there's some people that are, they're just going gangbusters. They're trying everything, they get it. And there's other people who are still just kind of dipping their toe into the chat and trying to figure out how that's going to work. Plus we kind of have these discussions about how is this work going to impact the workflow in terms of staffing, both for juniors and for sort of adjacent professionals. So, how do you see like lawyers, other adjacent professionals? How do you see them using this widget, inside a chat to manage a deal or review deposition transcripts or timelines or something like that?
Yeah, I'll take this, and then Dan, feel free to add, because I think I'll go back to my lawyer training. I think I'll have one example, I think, for deposition transcripts, and then one for kind of just document review and privilege calls. I think as a lawyer, you're used to the surface that you most commonly interact with. So when you're thinking about a deposition transcript, it kind of has this crazy Arial font, and it's on this page, and there's some things are in bold, some things aren't, and you have the reporter notes are going to look different. What an MCP app will allow you to do is pull up the actual visualization of what that looks like. So it feels like you're much more natively looking through, and you can type into Claude, "Hey, show me that point again that opposing counsel made." I forget what page it was on. Maybe it was like page 40. You can ask a question that ill-formed, and if the deposition transcript company made an MCP app that's well done, it would literally it would find the relevant text and populate the page. And then I think what's really cool about MCP apps is you can theoretically highlight it, or you can do other transformations, and it will ping back to the actual source of record and update it. So it's just a way to help you visualize things in the way that you've come to appreciate them because you've been working with depo transcripts for 20 years. To use another example, more junior associate, they're in some sort of, I'll just use relativity as one I was familiar with. If they made an MCP app, you can start doing your doc review in Claude. It's still all happening through relativity, but you get to see the documents populate. You can kind of say, like, oh, wasn't there another document like that? And Claude will know how to find that document, surface that to you, and then you can kind of do the privilege review on that. There's endless things you can do. But I think everyone's more comfortable working in the format that these great software companies have developed. So it kind of just allows you to have that native experience within the LLM client.
Yeah, as little friction as possible.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Dan
Yeah.
looks like he wants to fill in some gaps here.
I think Matt did like a wonderful job kind of explaining kind of the core benefit of MCP, but I think like there is kind of the next tier of evolution here in the workflow goes back to what we talked earlier, because like the power of MCP is composability. Like it's one thing when you have the app itself. So context switch reduction is a huge benefit, like right away, right? Like I'm working in Claude. I don't need to copy paste things from my, like my document on one screen, Claude on the other, and just me transfer is like, Claude, can you go do this? I can actually, inside the MCP app, like Matt called out, highlight something and then say, okay, can you pull in all the conversations that we had in the past year around this topic or this particular case? And it's going to look up through your Slack and Gmail and wherever else, and then pull that context in. So now you're basically in this one shared workspace between you and your agent, in this case, Claude, that has access. You're visually looking at a specific case, at a specific, set of maybe, like, say you're like a set of defendants, and you want to like ask, like, okay, like, what's the email? What did we email them before? And you can do that through multiple MCP servers that are connected, right? You're not just constrained to this one task. And think about like the analogy of like, how would you do this work before MCP existed, right? You'd have Gmail in one tab, maybe something else in another tab. You'd have Slack, and then you're like, okay, let me go search through Slack. Okay, like let me find these conversations. Let me review them manually, see if this is right. Let me go through Gmail. So it's like it's a lot of toil. It's a lot of this manual work that MCP connected to LLM just absolutely removes the need for. Because now you can just ask the model, say, go, you have access to Slack, you have access to email. I'm highlighting this in my MCP app. Go find me the relevant information. And then you're operating within the context of the same space.
One of the things I particularly like about this is we sometimes have discussions about sort of which AI tool to use for certain things, and is it a productivity tool or is it a legal tool? And we spend lots of time, way too much time, talking about this and sort of what should be used for what. But in your scenario, they would both be connected, and you would basically be asking a question. They would both be responding based on what they should be used for. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, for sure. And you can also, because you have access to all this information, you can use this to start drafting things up, right? You can also have another MCP server that's going to start a new Google Doc that says, can you like put all the notes that we're working on, just summarize them as we go, so that you have that one point of reference that you can then go to yourself. So you're not manually like jotting down every single note or every single thing that you've done, but you can have Claude do this for you. And because it has access to this like wealth of different tools and services, it can just plug in through all of them as long as they have an MCP server.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm curious on, because we talk a lot about working directly in Claude. I know tools like Harvey are also looking to maybe go the other way, where it's you can go there and use Claude within their environment as well. Do you see the MCPs like with the context switching between programs? Technically, could I be in relativity and then have Claude be working on something, but still be working in relativity? Does it work both ways, or does it just work from Claude and then to the other tools?
Yeah, it should work bidirectionally. I think there's probably questions about latency and when it gets updated, but that's true of every tool, right? Like I think about Google Docs back in the day. If two people are editing the same section, you get that little conflict message. So I think it can update the kind of system of record document, but you got to be thoughtful about timing.
Yeah.
And then with Harvey itself would be they use the APIs of a lot of these LLMs. They themselves are an AI client, so they might have MCP support too. And you can configure within Harvey the admin controls that we've talked about for Claude.
All right, so I want to jump into something that we've all heard about over the past few weeks, and that's skills. And the idea that you can package up these skills into essentially a markdown file that maybe packages up the firm's standard operating procedure or a type of voice that they work into these portable files that can be read by and used by AI. So, Matt, how can a firm? What would be your advice on being able to use skills to help things ranging from junior associates learning the firm style to other use cases that you can see packaging skills up to do?
Yeah, I think skills are really complementary to MCP servers, and they work in many ways the same. Like Claude will understand when you've asked it, like a set of, for lack of a better term, like trigger words, and it'll say, okay, you want me to use this skill. Now I know I'm going to get that in the sequence of events. I'll have the knowledge embedded in the skill. So ones that we've seen are, hey, when this is how we do NDAs. If we deviate, you can package the rules around when do you deviate from an NDA? When does something need to kind of get escalated to a particular person? I think tonality and the firm voice, or maybe there's a set of words you really don't like to use in briefs. So anything that you kind of think about as a procedure, I think are pretty helpful things to put into a skill. I'm sure Den might have more creative ways you can use them, but those are some of the examples that we've seen.
Yeah, Den, hit us. What can we
No,
be using skills for?
I have very little to add to what like Matt's description because he just nails it. I think that's accurate. It's basically a way for you to codify processes or things that you want to do, for example, in a consistent way. And people oftentimes confuse skills and MCPs and say they one replaces the other, but really, like as Matt called, they complement, and skills can refer to MCP servers. So for example, you can define something like, hey, if I'm ever working on a case that requires data from system X, use this MCP tool to go get that data. And when you return the data, make sure that you format it with this table heading in this font, and make sure to also put it into Google Docs to make sure that it's taken as a note with this document format. So you're essentially creating, as I refer to them, like the SOPs, the standard operating procedures of saying, like, if I want to do X, here's how to do this. And within a skill, you can, of course, refer to MCP servers. You can write custom scripts. You can call applications that run on your machine. So, for example, we've seen many times, and especially in scenarios where you're dealing with legacy applications, right? Something that, it runs on your computer. It hasn't been updated for the past 20 years, but it's so ingrained in the ecosystem that it's just there. And you can't necessarily have an MCP server for it because maybe like the company's not going to build it. So how do you use that tool? Well, you can encode it into the skill that you can say, oh, and by the way, use this application, launch it, and then inside of this application, you can do X, Y, and Z. And this application has a command line interface, by the way, that here's how you can, for example, insert a document, have it share that document with somebody else, and so on and so forth, right? So you encode a lot of these things, and ultimately a skill can use and refer to many different MCP servers. And actually, it does reduce the burden on the model too, because when you invoke a tool based on your prompt, and you're saying like, go and look up the conversations on this topic, the model then has to think like, okay, well, do I need to go look up for Slack? Let me go Gmail. Let me go look at some other like task board. Versus a skill, you can be very explicit in saying, if I ask you to do this, always use this tool. So then the model knows, oh, okay, you asked me to review an NDA document. I know exactly the tool that I need for this. I'm going to use that. So it just speeds up your process and helps you save a little bit on tokens too.
Yeah, sounds interesting. Before we wrap this up, I want to give you guys a chance. Is there anything that law firms should be like paying attention to for tools that are already out there that we may not be taking advantage of?
What should we be preparing for?
Yeah.
I'll do a plug for
All right.
co-work. We talked about it earlier. I think it's so skills and MCP servers. We talked about those. There's a kind of abstraction of those called plugins that we created first for Claude Code, but now for co-work, and I think other companies are adopting these. And it's a way to package these things together. So you could have a plugin. I mentioned NDAs before. You've got the NDA plugin, and it might connect to Ironclad or DocuSign or whatever, MCP servers you might have over there. But then it has the skills with your form voice. And you can also do other things. You can have like little webhooks or sub agents that you can define for the more technical users. An example of one of those might be, hey, check this against, check to make sure the user of this plugin is, has the right authority to sign or something like that. So I think there's this really cool new abstraction that's been created. And then one thing that, as we were just chatting earlier, I think the composability thing really is a huge unlock. I'm still trying to make better use of it myself. But when Den was sharing an example before, I'm like, man, what if you just also, you found like this golden document and you automatically add it to the timeline and add it to kind of your proof outline. So I think once you start thinking about things in that way, like at the end of the day, what are you doing as a lawyer? If you're a litigator, trying to prove a case, how can you more efficiently get the data that you used to be working on in Gmail or in Relativity into like the actual thing the artifact that you're going to use to win the case? That's super cool.
Dan, anything to add to that?
I'll say, as uncreative and cliche as it sounds, because we kind of talked about this earlier, but model capabilities now are not the same as they were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? So the best way to actually be in the know is to just use the tools, right? Like, you have access to Claude. Use Claude. Try it. Try it for reviewing documents. Try it for doing deep research. Try it to connect it to your data sources and application of different MCP servers and see what output you get. Because I've seen the highest success rates from people that actually start experimenting and saying, I wonder if Claude can do this. And they start like asking Claude and then realizing like, oh, hold on a second, there's an MCP server for this. Maybe I should do this. The fastest way to get up to speed and then to realize just how big of an unlock a lot of the model advancements are together with MCP is to just try it, is use it.
I had a question as I was thinking about in terms of this and knowledge management in organizations. And it seems that there is a real demand for knowledge to be like in real time and specific to the actual instance, as opposed to sort of how we have done it in the past, where it's much more structured, it's much more formal. You're going out to templates and looking for sort of best practices, and this seems to be more fluid. And I'm wondering if you guys can comment at all on sort of how what we've talked about impacts that.
Yeah, I think the way I think about it is each company is going to have to think through what its kind of knowledge management stack looks like and what best practices are. So I think skills could be very helpful for this, right? Maybe you have a skill that says if you're using Claude for XYZ, make sure part of it updates, like the Teams channel for this case, or make sure it updates the timeline, right? If there's a timeline that's really a system of truth for the case, there's ways to think about it, but I do think it's incumbent on each company to think creatively now, because I 100% agree with you. There's so much net new data being created, and I think the CISOs and the ops teams and the lead lawyers need to be thoughtful. What does like a system of record look like for what we're doing?
Yeah, I'll add to that I think there's a paradigm shift that's going to be happening that I think it's important to account for. Is that if before we thought about knowledge management through the lens of who in my firm can access this and be able to learn from it and use it, to now, is this actually helpful to agents as well? Like, whichever format I'm storing the data in, can an agent be able to successfully access it and act on that data to provide me a summary, some insights, or recap, right? Because I've seen it one too many times when folks have data. It's like, oh yeah, it's stored in this like super proprietary binary format that only this one application can access. And of course, like that's going to be problematic for agents versus storing it in formats that are more open, right? And I'm not making any opinion about like which format to store, but just like as folks think about the transition to this new world of agents now are doing a lot more than they've done before, how do you enable that those agents have the same access to the context of the knowledge of your firm, your organization, and other partners that you're working with, and not just humans?
hmm and it's sounding like, again, sort of having good organized data is still important. So that hasn't changed.
No, I think the importance of that is only going to increase because the agents themselves, right? Like they rely on some kind of taxonomy, some kind of organization. If I ask an agent, go find me a document related to case X, Y, and Z, it should know. It's like, oh, okay, well, cases from this year are here, instead of me going through a folder through like there's like a million documents. Give me like an hour to go search, right? Like you still have to optimize for the discovery and organization and having some kind of predictability.
hmm Okay, so before we get to the crystal ball question, what are some of the uses that you guys are using, like in your personal lives, that you're using AI to help with? I mean, it's like you're the technologist, so what are you actually using in your life?
I'll go first because then I'm curious for Jen to kind of come over the top and really impress. I've just been using.
It's not a competition. This is not a competition.
It's always a
All
competition.
right, it's always a competition. Go ahead.
I use it. I definitely use it more as a power user in work than I do in my real life. But I'm starting to think more creatively about how to use it. Which just like if things in your life that are very, very cumbersome, I think there's ways to unlock how to do that much more efficiently. And then on the other side, just on knowledge, I find myself, even when ChatGPT came out back in I think it was 2023, I just think like, oh, I can learn about any subject in the world in a way that's more personalized to me and ask follow-up questions. So things about just like investment advice or, hey, someone told me about this. Can you tell me about it? The way that like YouTube was a big unlock for getting more knowledge about the world, I'd still use it for that very basic purpose.
I think my big unlock, a lot of what Matt just described is it's precisely what I think I want to use a lot of these new modalities for. It's basically reduce toil in my life. And just normally, like, I think it's just a big personal relief in terms of using a lot of these tools almost like as a second brain, where previously, right, like we'd be like in a meeting like this, we'd be in a recording, and like, let's imagine if this is a work meeting, then like I need to like jot down notes on paper and be like, okay, like Greg said this, Marlene said this, Matt was talking about this, let me follow up on this. And that takes away attention, right? Because now I have to like follow this just very manually and figure out like, like hold on, like did Greg say this? Now we have tools that basically like auto transcribe it. Now it's a Google Doc, and then I can just go to Claude and say, hey, last week myself, Greg, Marlene, and Matt were talking. Can you summarize me the action items? And then it's like, oh, yep, you talked about this topic. And it's such a huge relief that like I don't need to worry about a lot of these like toil things that I think a lot of the capabilities are only going to get better. And I'm super excited to really, really focus my life on things that I care about and I'm excited about versus these like menial tasks.
Well, good. Thanks for sharing all of that. So we are at the crystal ball question. Den, I'm gonna start with you, and then we'll go to Matt. Looking into the near future, what change or challenge do you see in your crystal ball that you think we need to be prepared to face?
I'll give you a very non-satisfying answer.
All right.
Having seen the last 6 months, I have no answer for what the crystal ball holds. I don't know. Like, I think like anything that I will say right now is going to be completely wrong in 3 months, in 6 months, in a year. So I'd say, to me, we're living through times of very, very fast changes. And the best way to take advantage of a lot of this is to just use the tools and try to figure out how to apply them to your life. And then that's going to be the easiest way to just kind of ride the wave, basically. That's my answer. It's very unsatisfying.
No, it's probably the most truthful one, though. All right, Matt, how about you? You want to take a swing at this one?
Yeah, strong +1 to that. I have no idea. But I'll say two things that I think about in like in a semi-worrying way are the kind of loss of the art and like the craft of being a lawyer, like people delegating too much to these tools and losing kind of the forest for the trees, or they don't have to pay attention to the why and the strategic calls. I'm optimistic that people will use these more for the low leverage tasks and focus on the strategy and the craft. But it's not hard to imagine a world, you're negotiating a contract and the other side is using, Claude or ChatGPT to say like, push back on all of these points and like, give me the strongest red line. And then the other side does that. And you just like are never actually compromising and thinking about what matters. So I think I worry a little bit about the profession and the loss of kind of the human and, we're part of a trade together element of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Matt Samuels and Den Delimarsky from Anthropic, thank you guys both for coming in and having this conversation. I think our geeky audience is going to be busy building MCP servers over the weekend. So
yeah, and if you have questions, like we're always open to feedback. You can reach out. We're again, it's open source on GitHub, so just go there, give us your feedback.
Awesome.
That's terrific. So thanks to both of you, and thanks to all of our guests all of our listeners for taking the time to listen to the Geek and Review podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a colleague. You can find us on LinkedIn and now on our Substack channel.
And Den, you talked about going to GitHub. Is any other place, Matt, that people want to find you? Same place?
Yeah, if you end up being an Anthropic customer, or potential customer, you might end up chatting with us through that lens. But for contributions to the protocol itself and feedback, very much agree with Jen. Go through it's now part of the Agentic AI Foundation under the Linux Foundation. And if it's not Dan who ends up responding, it'll be someone else in the giant community that's been built around this.
And as always, the music you hear is from Jerry David DeSica. Thank you so much, Jerry, and bye, everybody.
Bye.